The first order of business is Pledge of Allegiance, so I'd ask if you stand if you're able and join us in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'm going to ask the committee to go into executive session briefly at the beginning of this meeting for two reasons. Reason number one is under Procedure 2, to conduct strategy session in preparation for negotiations with non-union personnel or to conduct collective bargaining sessions or contract negotiations with non-union personnel, and that would be the superintendent's contract. And procedure number 3, which is to discuss strategy with respect to collective bargaining or litigation if an open meeting may have a detrimental effect on the bargaining or litigating position of the public body, and the chair so declares, which I declare.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
This requires a roll call vote. Megan? Greg? Brian?
Aye.
Mo?
Aye.
And the chair votes aye. We will return to public session as soon as we are done. Okay. I'll call the meeting back to order. Before we get into public comment, I do want to make a comment at the very beginning. I'd like to thank the townspeople of Middleborough for their vote last Saturday on the new high school. We are extraordinarily excited. I'd like to thank them on behalf of not only the school committee, but the building committee. I went to the selectmen's meeting on Monday night to thank the community, and I will say the same thing that I said at the selectmen's meeting, which is, although the majority of people voted for it, there are still some 900 people who didn't. I would really ask them to get involved because it's their high school too. We expect as a building committee to be scrutinized. We expect to be overviewed. We expect our feet to be held to the fire. And I would really want those people to not feel out of the loop. It is our fervent hope that the new high school becomes the hub of Middleborough and becomes the center of our community. And we want everyone's opinion on how to make that happen. And so even though you may have been against it, we would welcome your participation and welcome your input. So again, I want to thank the people of Middleborough. Public comment. Does anyone have any comment on anything not on tonight's agenda? Seeing no one, I would turn it over to my friend Owen.
Thank you. Big congratulations to the boys soccer team for closing out a great season, ending it with a spot in the state tournament. Special congratulations to Nick Ramos for being named South Shore League MVP, and Mr. Rodriguez for being named the South Shore League Coach of the Year. Good luck to the football team in their game against Old Rochester tomorrow in Mattapoisett. Last weekend, they defeated number 1 Norwell, and tomorrow's game is for the State South Finals. Congratulations to the cheerleaders for qualifying in the South Shore League sectional tournament. Good luck to them. The season of giving is upon us. The Student Council is hosting their annual blood drive from 8 to 1 this Saturday in the gymnasium. This is open to all community members 16 or older, and walk-in appointments are welcomed. The MHS Speech and Theater Workshop will present Henry Episode 4, A New Hope, on Friday, November 17th and Saturday, November 18th at 7 p.m. in the MHS Auditorium. I can't wait to see the product of all of their hard work this year. The band will be attending the annual Veterans Day ceremonies tomorrow at the Town Hall. Thank you for representing the MHS family as we honor those who have served. And today was the first 21st Century Learning Conference. Students were able to pick workshops about surviving the modern world that interested them, presented by teachers and members of the community. This experience was both exciting and engaging, and to me, it bridged the gap between what it means to be a successful learner and what it means to be a successful thinker. I want to commend Mr. Brannigan and his team for taking the leap with this new endeavor and for all their hard work in this process. Also, a big thank you to Ms. Beard of the Berkland for delivering a keynote and allowing us to unleash the inner ninja inside all of us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Owen. Does any member of the committee wish to have any comments?
Mr. Chair?
Mr. Giovanoni.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just briefly, Owen touched upon this, that on Saturday, Veterans Day, which is Veterans Day, the 11th hour, the 11th day, the 11th month. There's usually a parade, but unfortunately the parade has been canceled due to weather. Our Middleborough Veterans agent, Jason Cox, sent out an email earlier that due to the fact the wind chill will be in the low to mid-teens, they're concerned with frostbite with the older veterans, but there will still be Veterans Day ceremony starting at 10 a.m. in the auditorium that's upstairs at the town hall. So people are still welcome to come to the town hall on Saturday, the 11th of November. The ceremony will start at 11 a.m. and come on down. I know the band will be there. 10 a.m. I'm sorry, 10 a.m. I'm sorry, the 11th hour is in my mind, but 10 a.m. And another piece that I wanted to take from the back end of our document is, once again, another great contribution by the Mary Kay Good PTA is in our packet. Thank you again, Mary Kay Good PTA. They donated another iPad to the community, the school. It just, they keep giving, and the parents keep giving and putting this stuff together and earning money and donating, and I really do appreciate all that hard work that all the PTAs and the PTSAs and that do in our district. Thank you.
Anyone else have any comments they wish to make? I do want to mention two things. I don't even know if Mr. Brannigan knows. I spent the good portion of the day on Saturday at Oak Point. Oak Point's yard sale this year raised over $26,000. And Oak Point is going to change, so their scholarships to Middleborough students, which had been $1,000, will now be $1,500. And for the first time, they will give away one scholarship to one Middleborough student for $1,500 per year for the 4 years of college. So that's a fantastic leap, and we want to thank them. And I also want to thank Ian Gilson. Ian represented Middleborough at the MASC conference in a workshop entitled Student Voices. And so I really appreciated Ian doing that. Ian left the Cape to play soccer that night. And so he had a long, long day that day, but played fantastic. So I do want to thank Ian for that. Next up on our agenda is Mr. Catino. How are you, Mr. Catino?
I guess we had to turn this one on. Good evening. I, on behalf of the teachers of the high school, would like to thank the town of Middleborough and the residents for voting in support of the new high school. Other than that, today's 21st Century Learning Conference was a good time. I thought that it was a wonderful idea, and I had a good time presenting myself, so hopefully I'll have a lot of students seeking retirement investments. That's what I covered.
I was amazed at the course selection that the students get to choose from, Mr. Catino. They seem to have a lot of fun. I know a lot of the kids that I see on a regular basis were very excited about their course selections. There was everything from fishing to auto repair to retirement investors, and my personal favorite was how to survive an FBI investigation.
I did see that one, and I was thinking to myself, how useful is that, and how many people would actually be investigated by the FBI?
You'd be surprised that many of the students found that to be very useful and all wanted to sign up for that course.
I think it's more like they want to be the FBI investigators, but, you know, anyway. I don't have anything else. Any questions?
Any questions for Mr. Catino? Mr. Catino, thank you very much.
All right, thank you.
I believe we don't have any recognition per se, so I'll turn it over to the superintendent's report.
I think we've already recognized the citizens of Middleborough for
Absolutely.
a 2-to-1 majority, which is wonderful. So, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'd like to invite down to the table Mr. Brannigan first, and then we'll be joined by other principals coming up. Mr. Brannigan is joining us to talk about the high school class of 2018 and their final activities. And if you think it's not too far away, we just finished term 1 at the high school, and term 1 finals were just held. So, Mr. Brannigan, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Are you excited about the new high school, Mr. Brannigan?
I am very excited about the new
Thank you.
high school.
I figured that.
Good evening, everyone. Just you have in front of you the final activities for the class of 2018, which is always something that I welcome your approval for, so that way there that we can then begin the notification of our families so they can begin their planning for those final days and weeks of the senior year. You will notice just some of the highlights of the final activity schedule. That week going into Memorial Day weekend will be our final exams for the seniors that we will engage. Our senior barbecue and also our kind of final senior meeting will take place on Thursday the 24th. You will notice the 25th is not a day where seniors will need to report. However, it is a day that if students have any makeup work to do or they have any sort of issues they need to resolve before we allow them to complete their academic journey at Middleborough, that is the day to do that. It is also a professional development day at the high school, so that is the reason why that for the senior class it is not a day that they would report. And then, of course, the senior week events, you will notice the senior breakfast on Tuesday the 29th, followed by the senior prom, which is already an event that you've approved, which will be taking place at the Atlantic Resort in Middletown, Rhode Island on Tuesday the 29th. Our scholarship evening, which is the 30th, which is an invite only based upon all of our seniors that would be receiving scholarships. And then, of course, the signature events, our senior last assembly on the 31st, and, of course, the senior walk, which would take place on Friday, June 1st, which would close this chapter for the class of 2018 with their graduation at 10:30 a.m. on Saturday, June 2nd in the Middleborough High School Gymnasium.
Anybody have any questions for Mr. Brannigan? Do I hear a second? Discussion. Mr. Brannigan, thank you very much. And my fervent hope is the Friday before graduation that the parade gets bigger and bigger as it did last year. And so, we'd like as many members of the community as possible to come out and just be a part of it, because it is an incredibly fun event. And not only do the kids love it who are graduating, but the kids in the school love it just as much, and they do a fantastic job.
Certainly.
So, any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We have the class of 2018's last days. Thank you, Mr.
Now
Brannigan.
graduate. Thank you.
Mr. Brannigan, you can stick around. We're going to move to the MCAS update. And while we're doing that, Mr. Brannigan, if you have a second, just Owen had spoken about the Red Cross Drive. If you want to just sort of reiterate that as we're being joined by fellow principals.
Sure. Just as our other principals are joining me at the table, that the Student Council for many years has always done our annual blood drive, and historically it's always been done during a school day, which has really been limiting because we do not open it to the public. And we were finding that our numbers that we were getting for donations was dropping, so we decided to change what we do and now go public. So we took the Saturday, November 11th. We thought it was kind of an appropriate day to be able to pay it forward and to make a difference. So the building will be open from 8 to 1 in the gym for any member of the community to come on in and to donate blood to the American Red Cross.
Chair?
Yes.
As part of that event that you had, it was in our consent agenda anyway, but I wanted to make mention that the Powder Puff game and the bonfire is coming up also on November 21st, I believe.
Right, it's actually been moved now to the 20th.
The 20th?
Because of the no school day on the 22nd, that we needed to make sure that we had all of our pieces in place, because it is such an important week in terms of Thanksgiving Day games and things like that. So making sure we could get everything in, we moved all of those events to Monday evening. So if in the event there's weather that conflicts, which in the past it has, that we'd be able to move that football game and the signature event, that bonfire, to the Tuesday. So as of right now, it's on Monday the 20th.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair, we now move to the next item on the agenda, which is our discussion of our district's MCAS results. I would share with you that overall, there's a bit of disappointment, I would say, in the district, and we've fallen back a little bit, but we want to talk about the next generation MCAS and our results specifically in each school, and I'm going to ask that each principal share their results from each of their schools, along with some general slides about our updated next generation MCAS, and it's called Next Gen. So can we straighten that out just a little bit on the screen? Thank you. So the question on the board here is, what is the next generation MCAS? And it is an updated version of the nearly 20-year-old MCAS assessment that came into place after ed reform, after 93. It focuses on student critical thinking abilities, application of knowledge, and the ability to make connections between reading and writing. And it gives a clearer signal of readiness for the next grade level or college and career. So that's an important point there. It gives you a clear signal of readiness for the next grade level. Designed to be given on a computer, paper versions remain available. And I would share with you that at the next slide, 60% of all grade 3 to 8 students took the test on computers, but still a big whopping 40% did take it on paper. So, and there was a clear difference between paper results and computer results with regard.
Just for clarification,
Sorry.
60% of students in the state.
60% of students in the state, exactly, thank you. It was first given in the spring of 2017, grades 3 to 8, English, language, arts, and math, and it will eventually replace the old legacy. Now we can move on to the next, which we're already there, thank you. 60% of all grades 3 to 8 students test-wide took the test on computers. In Middleborough, we made the decision that we would do it computer-based. We wanted to jump in with both feet. We realized there may be a learning curve for students, and there was, and we hopefully will get through that curve with some extra practice on computers and technology as we move forward. It's being phased in the state, computer-based testing by grade level, spring 2017, grades 4 and 8, language, arts, and math, spring 2018, grades 4 and 5 and 7 and 8 in ELA and math, and grades 5 and 8 in science and tech, and spring 2019, all tests in grades 3 to 8, grade 10 ELA and math. And if we look at the next slide, we're used to the legacy tests of advanced, proficient, needs improvement, and warning. Those are the gradations, if you will, on the old legacy test. The new marks are exceeding expectations, meeting expectations, partially meeting expectations, and not meeting expectations. So those are the new next generation sort of gradations, if you will, on these tests. Excuse me. If we could move on to the next one. A little bit smaller type. What does it mean if my child scored proficient or advanced on the older MCAS, but only partially meeting expectations on the next generation? And number one, the state has issued this advisory. It says your child is not alone. Early projections show that approximately half of the students who took the next gen MCAS scored in the partially meeting or not meeting expectations category. In general, the new standards for meeting expectations are more rigorous than the standards for reaching the proficient level on the old MCAS. Massachusetts educators set the new standards to help prepare students for the next grade level and ultimately college and a career. In other words, the test is more difficult. The next generation MCAS is designed to assess whether a student is prepared for academic work at the next level and is therefore forward-looking. This is a different expectation for students because the older MCAS looked at a student's level of preparation for the grade level in which they were tested. So it also takes a close look at where your child's score falls within the partially meeting expectations category. If it isn't close to meeting expectations, talk with your child's teacher about how you can work together to help your child catch up. Contact the principal, and those results will be coming home in the near future. So now we go to interpreting the results, and I'm going to turn it over to Derek Thompson, who's going to begin from here and talk about some of the interpretations, how we interpret these new results in this next gen MCAS.
Well, I think, so the test is different for grades 3 through 8. And so one of the things that they've done differently this year is we get what's called a scaled score. And so for every question kids are asked, that question is awarded a number of points, and those points are added up, and then we end up getting a scaled score. And what I know the state is striving towards is to be able to say that a scaled score in grade 3 is equivalent to a scaled score in grade 7 or grade 8. So you're going to start to see us be lumped in grades 3 through 8 in terms of school percentiles and things like that, and achievement percentiles. So that really changes things a lot. It's important to understand that too. 2017 is a baseline year, so this is really the first year of our new assessment. It's a completely different test. It's not the same test, so a kid who is meeting expectations or not meeting expectations, it's just different. It doesn't mean that a kid learned more or less. It's a different test, so that's really important. So it's hard to draw comparative analysis when you're looking at the data across the board. This is across the state in ELA in grades 3 through 8. That's really hard to see, But the message in sharing that slide is that on the bottom is the scaled scores. So you see that ranges all the way, I have a hard time seeing this without my glasses on, but 455 to 520. Most of the schools, the vast majority of schools, are really lumped up in a really close area there between about 495 and 505, 485. So a scaled score difference of 5 to 10 points can make a really big difference in your achievement percentile. So that's really important to understand. And again, it's one test, one snapshot in time this year. There is no comparative data. So you see the same thing happen in math. The majority of the schools in the state are really lumped up within about 10 to 15 points of each other. So I guess that's an important thing to kind of take into consideration. So HBB results, the first two slides are just a quick graphic I'm going to go through, but just shows how we stacked up against the state average in ELA in grades 3 through 8, which is different than what you've seen in the past, and in math. So we're close to the state average in ELA and a little above the state average in math at HBB. And then these are our overall scores. It's hard to see some of those. The projector, unfortunately, is cutting it off. But overall at HBB, we're pretty happy with our results. We've done a pretty solid job. Again, it's hard to look at the data and really interpret the data. But as a school who was a level 3 school, for being in the bottom 20th percentile in the state, which is something I've sat here the last couple of years arguing that we are not in the bottom 20th percentile, based off our achievement. You know, this is our first year to stand on our own 2 feet, and our achievement percentiles show that we're, you know, doing a really good job. You can't see them up there, but we have a lot of reasons to be celebrating. Third grade math was in the 77th percentile in the state, reading in the 60th percentile in the state. Overall, we were 40 and 49th. Our SPED numbers have also increased. They're not up there, but our special ed students performed in I keep getting these backwards. It's like the 30th percentile overall in 5th grade in ELA and 31st in math, I think, if I have that right. But our lower grade cohorts were really high in SPED, which was great. Our 5th grade special ed cohort, we lacked some continuity in that class. We had a couple teachers that were out for large chunks of the year, so they still didn't do as well as we hoped. But overall, we were happy with our performance. We still have a lot of room to grow. It's hard to look at this data, again, because there really is nothing to compare it to. But we administer Star 360. We talk about that a lot. Star 360 also gives us a scaled score similar to MCAS. And the student results at the end of the year on Star 360 in our building mirrored exactly how the kids did on math. So we had a pretty good feeling walking in how we thought our kids were going to do in math. In ELA, our 3rd graders actually did a little better, but in grades 4 and 5, they did about 10 percentage points worse on MCAS than they did on Star 360, which is not surprising to us. It was the first time our kids had taken a longer online test. Star 360 is an online test, but it only takes the kids about 20 to 25 minutes. That assessment, if you remember from us talking before, really measures what the kids are capable of. So it is testing a lot of those higher order thinking questions and putting those in front of the kids, but they don't have to read as long passages, and there isn't the same demand in writing. So they didn't do as well as the test said that we know the kids are capable of. So when we go back and look at that, we know that there was something technical getting in the way, and we knew the kids had just gotten the devices in their hands really in February. So we're working really hard on making sure the kids have more time this year working in typing for writing. So that doesn't get in the way. Just that fluency. A lot of our 3rd graders, 4th graders are still just point and peck when they're typing. So what they're capable of putting out handwritten-wise is not what they're typing. Which really, again, suggests that we need to interpret these results with caution, because 40% of the schools were still doing paper-based tests. And we know that the kids who are doing paper-based tests did better. They did better in Park, which also skews the growth results. The state has essentially told us to be really cautious looking at growth percentiles in our schools because we did. Yeah. Yeah.
That was one of the questions I wrote down. Because earlier on, Mr. Lynn shared that 60% of the schools took it on the computer, which leaves a huge percentage on paper. Did the state present that data, kids who did paper versus kids who did computer, and looked like?
They didn't give it to us.
No, they didn't give it to us
They didn't
like
give that
that.
to us?
No.
They didn't give us the data, so we could see, look at the people who did paper did better in the writing because.
They didn't separate.
Okay,
No, they
yeah.
didn't. They said that they grabbed questions that were similar and compared them
Okay.
in creating growth and things, but that they still need to be interpreted with caution because what they do know is that schools that did paper-based Park the year before, which was us, kids did better than kids who did computer-based Park. So it's just really skewed the results. You go back over the last couple of years, we have towns all over the place, all over the map in terms of the mode of testing, the test they gave. So it's going to take us a few years before we can really say, that's why the slide before, this is our baseline year, this is where we're starting from. We're going to be able to really see how we grew. We have achievement percentiles, we can look and see where we stacked up against other towns and schools, but even that is different. We're being stacked and looked against grades 3 through 8, not 3 through 5 or 6 through 8. And a 10-point spread, which really in a score of 590, 10 points isn't a huge difference, but it makes a really big difference in school percentiles.
And
So,
a school that may have taken it all on paper versus a school that's
Right.
new on
Exactly.
devices and took it on
Right.
advice. I think that's
so to
important.
me, when I look at that and I say, all right, our kids got devices in their hands in February, we already did pretty well. Again, where I was being faced with you're in the bottom 20th percentile, and I'm saying, no, we're not, year after year. And our percentiles are right there, right in the middle of the state, which is, we want to be higher, but it's not the bottom 20th percentile. Our kids are going to have a whole full year of the devices in their hands. Other schools are going to begin transitioning. I feel really confident that those percentiles would have been even higher if all the schools had done computer-based testing. So I think that's important to note. And I forget what my last point was.
And
but-
Mr. Chair, while he's
Sorry.
remembering, I want to tell you that Mr. Thompson was invited to a state conference to talk about his special needs results of his special needs population and how improved they were. And I think the person from the State Department used the word exemplar with regard to HPB. So that's a plus.
So, yeah, we still have a lot of work to do, and I think, I remember my last point. So we did interestingly note was that the way our kids did at the beginning of the year on Star 360 was exactly how they ended up doing on MCAS. And our kids this year in grades 3, 4, and 5 are already testing about 10 percentage points higher than they did on MCAS. So even if all we did was maintain where we are at the start of the year, which certainly isn't our goal, we'd see a nice jump in that going into next year. So overall, we're happy. Science continues for us to just remain stagnant. We have a science program that we're working really hard to implement this year. And I guess the last thing I want to say is just we have a ton going on with the Leslie Collaborative up and starting to get that moving, and Envisions 2.0, we're mapping out our math curriculum with Susan Looney. So we have a lot of things going on. Teachers have a lot on their plate, so.
Discovery Science textbooks.
Yep, that's science.
With respect to this computer versus paper, I stewed on it enough in my own, this past weekend. I look at the data for the state, and it's a perfect bell. It's disgusting, because we have two separate tests. We have a test that was on paper, we have a test that was given on computer. And that's two separate tests, yet the formula somehow makes a perfect bell, which really, really disturbs me beyond anything, because they're not phasing in the requirement until 2019 for a computer. Can we go back? I hate saying go backwards, but I'm at a point now where if we're going to be challenged and we're going to be compared to school districts that are not doing computer in a bell curve and put on the back side of it, It just is disturbing to me. And when I said I was not going to get upset about this, but I look at this because it's not representative of our district. You compare an apples to oranges again. We set a baseline, and it's just completely disturbing that nobody's going to do anything about this. I can't wait to see what's going on Channel 25 at 10 o'clock and discussing this exact situation, teaching to the test and everything else. Because I've got 2 separate tests. I had 4 separate tests. Now I've got 2 separate tests, and they're not going to require it for another 4 years or 3 years.
They're requiring 4th this year. It's a requirement for 4th grade and 7th and 8th and 4th and 5th is a requirement, and that's how they're phasing it in. Last year, the requirement was 4th grade, and 93% of them did. 93% of the 4th grade did it online, but you could get it. You could get it
Yeah.
if your district couldn't support it, or your school couldn't support it. But most schools were not comparing the same data.
And that's the concern that I have, is that comparing of data. I'm really worried that we're comparing data that is not the same when we compare ourselves statewide, and everyone else compares us statewide. I'd love to see our data of those schools who did it only on computer versus us. Because those who didn't do it, the 40% of the districts that didn't do completely computer-based, they're different. They're completely different. As we knew there were going to be problems. I knew there were going to be major problems, and my concern was that we were going to have a dip because of the computers. And it's not a test on what the kids knew. It was the kids could run a computer. Yeah, they're going to have to, but to high stakes test this is concerning. I don't know if there's something we can do about it, if we can get out of it. I don't even think we can.
Brian, you and I voted against moving to this test last year, but I will say this, and I think that what I'm happy to hear from, I had similar concerns, Brian, but the thing I'm happy to hear from you all is that now you're adjusting how you teach and how the kids are working with computers to prepare to deal with the test. I would have hated to wait until a year or 2 years from now, and then, when the tests are high stakes again, say, we're behind now, we have to figure it out. And I get it, so I really appreciate, I understand.
I want to say, my anger isn't here.
No.
My frustration is looking at a bell curve that's perfect, and then saying we're comparing the same thing, and it really isn't. I mean, I didn't take stats, I'm sorry, but I'm not comparing the same thing. I think that I get concerned when I see, because the first thing that was reported in the paper is certain results, and all I want to say is, let's compare them all the same, and unfortunately. So I'm sorry, I feel, because I know where the data is, and we're better than this. I know we are. I can feel it. I see it. I know what we're doing. But I'm sorry. I'll go.
At the line. So this is the same kind of, sorry, I don't really need this anyway, but overall graph, we were disappointed in our results at Mary Kay Good. I'll be very honest with you. The teachers and the students have worked extremely hard, and I think I do agree with you, Mr. Giovanoni. It's not a reflection of what goes on at Mary Kay Good on a daily basis, that's for sure. And you bring up the paper-based versus computer-based, and can you hit the next thingy? Sorry. There's the math, but what we decided to do, our special education numbers weren't as great. And what we made the decision last year to give all of our students, except for one student that required large print, which we could not do, obviously, on the computer. We didn't know what the computer test was going to look like. So all of our students, except for the one that required large print, took the computer-based. We're rethinking that, of course, for this year. We have students that, yes, the technology did get in the way because of special education reasons or other pieces that get in the way. So we're looking at our students, our ELL students, our students on 504s, our students on IEPs, and asking that question. Does the technology get in the way of our students, really being able to access the test on an equal level? That's what it's about. It's not about who gets a better test score. It's about evening the playing field for our students. We were, like I said, our 4th grade was not where we wanted it to be. Was I surprised? I'll be honest with you. No, we took a hit in writing, and I'll tell you, during the test, we have to collect scrap paper. I know it sounds, and we have to shred it. And I said to Mr. Phoenix, the assistant principal, because only we can touch it, and I said, we're going to take a hit in writing. I could see it. Because our teachers do an amazing, amazing job of teaching the writing process. And they teach it this way. And we teach graphic organizers, and we teach brainstorming, and we teach brain frames, and all of these techniques. What we did not do, it's not an excuse, but we didn't do it, was we didn't put this in front of them with the scrap paper to prepare them for, because what do kids do with computers? They go right to this. They don't see the connection with this to this. I watched it in May, and of course, we went, whoa. That's already been, I've met with every single teacher individually already. And I had them do an experiment. I had the teachers create on Google Classroom an open response question. And I said, don't give them directions. Give them something, what you do this weekend, something simple. Don't give them any directions. Give them paper, give them pencil, give them a tablet, and say, go at it, and watch. And they did it. And guess what every kid did? Right to the computer. So take the computer away, do it again. We got brain frames. We got the writing process. That needs, for us, we know that needs to be explicitly taught now. They need to know that this is part of the writing process, but this needs to come before. Same with the math. We learned that right off, so that's already been addressed. We're seeing changes already, so we're really excited about that. As far as our data, like I said, you know, the scaled score, 495, the average was 500. We're right in the ballpark. We're not, you know, really outside the ballpark. Like I said, fourth grade, I would have liked to see a little bit better in our ELA, but we're sitting in the ballpark. But we've already made adjustments. We've already upped our writing. We know that was an area for us. The teachers were the ones, too, that said, you know, we know we need to up our rigor. We need to look at that. I think the work with Susan Looney that we're doing in math with our mapping, the teachers are absolutely thrilled with it, with how do we maximize envisions, because, you know, we need to fit all of this in this amount of time. You can't leave things out. You can't save things till, you know, later on. So how do we make it fit? And the mapping is allowing us to do that. Same with Leslie. Last year we didn't have that in place. This year we're getting three, sometimes 4 teachers at every, in grades 3, 4, 5 trained. We've also beginning our training with our instructional coaches in our K through 2. So those are all changes that are happening. Again, it's very frustrating when you're looking at scores that are sitting on the cusp, and you're looking at, oh, we're right there. We had so many students at the 495, the 499, the 496s. One more question, 1 or 2 more points on an open response would have pushed them over. Okay, we own it. We got it. We own it. We've already made our corrections, and we're ready to move forward. Our science, we did take a little bit of a dip in science. I think it was a 2-point dip. I'm not quite know the math, a 3-point dip from last year. But again, with the science, the nice piece of the science connection is the program has, being the tech book, which is kind of nice, gets our kids another, on the computer, the articles going back and forth. So we're really excited about that. We got work. We got a lot of work. It's great that, you know, I'm in year 3, and I feel this bond, that's what we're calling it, right, a bond, is really, in the staff, it really feels like a complex. It really feels like it doesn't matter anymore where you go to school, and that was a goal that we set for ourselves at the beginning, and we're moving together, and that's what's important.
Can I ask a question too? Obviously, the piece that's most concerning to me is the kids who are in the not meeting expectation category. Can you talk a little about what, you know, once you get the MCAS scores, when you realize those kids are not meeting, now what's available to those kids going forward to hopefully move them out of that category as they progress?
So at Mary Kay Good, like I said, I've met with every teacher. The teacher comes in with the data the current data that they have and the data from the year before. We've put RTI in place. We've also put guided reading in place, solid guided reading time built within the schedule. Math workshop time where children are working in small groups. One of the reports that comes out in Renaissance is a standards report. And it's the most important report that I emphasize with our teachers. It's the end of the year standard. What are these children, what standards, I'm going to use 4th grade. what are the children in fourth grade supposed to be able to do, and where they fall in that category. So it allows the teachers to already foreshadow, okay, we're coming onto this unit on fractions, who's coming in strong in fractions that need maybe some enrichment, because we don't want to forget those kids either. We don't want to forget those kids that are, that are exceeding. We want to keep them exceeding. It's not always about the kids that are just not meeting. So what do we do about those kids? And we need to make RTI groups. We need to make, the small groups within the workshop time as well.
Yeah, well, so the other thing too is starting the Rotary Raise Up,
Yep.
which is intensive 15-week program, which we're really targeting and focused on working with kids in grades 4 and 5 now. They were in 3 last year, but 3 and 4 last year. But so really targeting working with those kids. We have our Walk to Learn every morning, so we already know who those kids were.
Yeah.
That wasn't a surprise to us. It's not like we waited for the MCAS data and now we're doing something. We knew who they were. That's the point in Star 360. So it really, as Mrs. Andrade said, it's everything ranging from the targeted small group instruction in the classroom on an everyday basis to the Tier 2 interventions that we implement, including Read Naturally, LLI groups. We have reading, reading
Don't forget
recovery for some of our kids. So we have quite a bit going on to support those kids and move them forward. So.
And then the other piece that I'll throw out to you, sort of, as we begin budget negotiations, budget discussions, should we really be thinking about the idea of, devices to kids starting at K?
Oh, yes.
Because of what, you're talking about kids getting devices early part of the year, and then having a couple of months to work with them before they have MCAS. Maybe we should look at the idea of if we start kids in kindergarten with the devices and they're working with those devices, that now we have 3 years of working with devices before they hit MCAS or MCAS 2.0 or whatever you want to call it. And so I just raised that question.
That would be phenomenal.
Yeah, I mean, there's no doubt that having more devices in our kids' hands would be helpful. I think overall, when you're talking budget, first and foremost, I'd say continuing and sustaining the programming that we have in place right now and giving it time to play out. I am so confident in what we're doing right now with our partnership with Lesley University, the work with Envisions and Susan Looney. The science program is going to take us a little while to get the hang of that. So I'd say that's my first priority, but yeah, putting more devices in kids' hands absolutely would help. And we're always talking about that. We're in the process of that right
Doing that now.
You've done that work of transforming those units that were with the seniors last year, that are being transformed to the elementary school. And they had a meeting on that last week.
Yeah.
We already have our plan. We already have our plan to, where are we going to get our biggest bang for our buck? We just got 60 machines from the high school at each school. So where's our biggest bang right now? And I met with the teacher leaders and said, I want the teachers to have a voice. And what do you and where do you, because everybody wants them, but where do we find the most value right now and where they need to be? So we devised that plan of how we were going to roll out those 60 carts, 60 units, I'm sorry.
They shouldn't be sitting on a shelf.
Oh, they will not be.
The other thing too is, and I just throw this out, and Paul, when we first started the bring your device to school and everything like that, the tech department really had an open house to meet with parents to discuss what they should be looking for, how they should buy a computer and things like that. Maybe we should do that at the much earlier levels, because have the, it's sort of, I don't mean it this way, but I guess I do, when you have kindergarten orientation, start that discussion with people about at that age, what device is going to work for your kid and be a part of your child's life and help your child progress and go from there. And so.
I know a concern of parents. I'm a mom of a 16-year-old. But, and I know parents are concerned about screen time, but there's screen time and then there's screen time, and that's how I look at it. My son has a device too. And, valuable screen time. My son now is excited because he has this little thingy that he uses, but that's for school, it's educational, which is very different than an Xbox or very different than, the phone. So when it's used in a way that's productive to a child's learning, then it's, this is what we're in, this is the life and the generation that we're in right now.
Right, I'm not
Yeah.
talking about buying, so your kid can watch movies on
Right.
Netflix. I'm talking about
Right.
buying devices that'll help your child progress and hopefully help them be a better student as they go.
Absolutely.
And I also, I will say this too, depending on the device, kids playing games isn't a bad thing either, because it gets them used to that device, gets them to do things, and you know as well as I do, there are kids out there who can fix your device much quicker than you can, because they know exactly what they're doing, because they spent most of their lives, in this and in that. And I think we also have to look for ideas and apps that are both fun and create a learning environment.
We also have to get these young people that when they get on these computers for these tests, to take a deep breath, to take their time, because whenever they're on the computer, seemingly, they're always trying to win the game, do everything as fast as they could. Where's the internet speed? How come this program isn't loading? Got to get them to slow down and take a breath, and hopefully with the technology education we also have instituted at the elementary level now, we're in our second year of that those weekly lessons those students have with cutting and copying and pasting and scrolling and doing all those basic computer skills that are necessary to be successful with the MCAS test, the next gen, that they're getting more and more used to that. Even students without devices at home. So.
Not using the paper. I see it all the time, even in adults, they don't use the paper. And I think that's something parents may need to know. You said that, and I see it all the time. I myself I use paper all the time. I like my technology, but you write your ideas down, then you go to the technology. People just don't do that. And the kids aren't doing it. And I do it in my own household. I make sure my kids are doing it. And I think that some parents might need a little help with that too, to make sure that their kids are doing it at home that way. I believe at the middle school, when we get there, math has a worksheet that they're supposed to bring in and give to the teacher, and that's a great thing. I love that, to make sure that the students are doing it with paper and computer. But when you said that, Lisa, I couldn't agree more. I see it myself personally, and I feel for because I don't think they get the best product right on the first step. It may take them 4 or 5 tries, and that's the problem.
Right.
We don't have time for 4 or 5 tries.
Yes.
So I think to kind of put a bow on this, there's just a lot here, right? So the scores are okay, but it's the first year of a very different test where there were a couple of different versions taken. So I think the learning is, and I think what you're doing, what is the device issue? What's actually like a function of the test, and do our kids know how to take a test on this device? And what is actually a curriculum or teaching and learning or a gap somewhere? And I'm hearing from the both of you that you have stopped and you have looked at the data and you've identified, here's an issue with just the function of taking the test and translating the knowledge into this format as opposed to paper. Excellent. And I'm also hearing from you, and also we're looking at this data and saying, where are our gaps and where do we have room to grow? Because everybody has them and we clearly have some. So thank you for going through the data, separating those two conversations, because it's critical that we do when we look at this data, and for continuing to find a path forward. And that's it. I think it's the end of this discussion. We could go on, but there's really no need to. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. With that, we can transition to the middle school.
Thank you. Well, Mo, I just think you said it perfectly. I mean, that's exactly what we have all of us have started already, because we've gotten the scores for a while now, and it's going to the teachers and having them look at it and kind of now start to dig in and to see what are the issues with the curriculum, with their own teaching, to try to figure out where we can kind of support it and make it better. The one thing that we are happy about is that we're sitting here now at this point in the year knowing what test it's going to be for the next few years. And we haven't had that luxury for the last few years. So that is nice to see that we're going to have a consistent data point that we can kind of point to and look at and say, this is what we're going to do. And the whole computer-based idea is to build them so that when it is high stakes, they have as many practices under their belt as they can possible, so that when they get to fall at 10th grade and it ends up being something good for them. If you flip through, so when you get to our kind of highlight kind of deal, our 8th grade ELA was definitely a highlight. And I see that as a building point from all the work that's been done in elementary school through 7th grade up to 8th grade. It's not just our 8th grade teachers that are teaching these kids these same skills that they need to do in the 8th grade test. It's something that's been built upon and continued to kind of make that foundation as strong as possible. And so when they got to 8th grade, they did know how to write. They did know how to read a poem. And it wasn't just the 8th grade teachers from September. I mean, the 8th grade teachers did a phenomenal job, but it's all those teachers beforehand that have kind of worked with these kids over the course of 5 years when they're now taking the test. And so that was definitely a highlight. It's 6 points above the state, and the growth percentage was 72%, which is just phenomenal to think about. Overall, our student growth percentages, when you dig a little deeper, it's not on this screen, but when you dig a little deeper, our special ed scores were very positive. And that shows the work that Dr. Deborah Harris is doing with our co-teachers, that Carolyn Lyons and Jen Casatina in my building is doing. And it's a definite takeaway in a positive way that we can kind of see that something's working here when you see the positive growth percentages, because a lot of times you'll see, okay, well, 1 year you'll have a positive growth, and then the next year you'll have a negative growth because you made so much growth. And here was something overall you could see in every grade level that it was positive. Our kind of the number of students overall moving from what's now the lowest kind of level that used to be kind of thought of as warning is that percentage. It took a little bit of a dip, and usually we're either on mark with the state or a little bit higher, and that was kind of something to look at and say, okay, we're moving kids out of that lowest level, which is good. The math standards are tough, because when you look at the math standards, you'll find so many questions that for one standard it might be one question, and if you did poorly on that, then all of a sudden you did poorly. And then for another standard, you look, oh wow, we were 8% above the state, but there was only one question. So it's really hard to kind of gauge. But when you looked at the math standards overall, that we had statistics was our positive one, that we were either right with the state or just a little bit above, and that was across the board, 6 through 8. Our science and technology, our special ed CPI, because again, that's using the old legacy test, was over 4% of the state average and they ranked it out according to special ed, which is nice because they never used to do that in the past. It wasn't, you would compare your special ed versus overall, which really was apples to oranges. And now they had a straight percentage of special ed students against special ed students for the state, and we were 4% above that. So we're clearly doing some good work there, and it should be a positive that should be looked at. In terms of what we need to kind of assess and look at, our 6th and 7th grade writing scores were really where we took a fall in ELA. And Lisa said it best when she said that the kids didn't really use the scrap paper, didn't do the writing process that we've been teaching them since kindergarten, and how to write and do all those things that we want them to do, to rough draft. And so that's something we definitely need to work on, and it's something that the 7th and 6th grade teachers are taking seriously and are already starting and doing some MCAS pre-testing right now to kind of see where they are as a data point, kind of starting point, and then kind of build from there. And then in math, we really just need to take a harder look at everything that we're doing, especially our pacing, because the test comes before the end of the school year. And if you sit there and say, okay, well, I'm going to get to this in June, the test is already done. So we really have to take a look at pacing across the board, the 3 teachers in each grade, and see how they're using the pacing guide and how we can kind of go through to make sure that we're at the point where we need to. And Dr. Gates did a really nice job of talking about it the other day with some of our teachers. So what are we doing? We got accepted for a literacy academy through DESE, which is kind of taking the work that's done in elementary and carrying it on in the middle school. It's not Leslie, it's Hill literacy, and we've gone to a couple of sections so far. It's a teacher from every grade level, special ed, myself, Mr. Thomas, and Miss Castantina, and we're kind of working on it. And it's really a lot of response to intervention, which has been done a lot in the elementary school, that we want to carry on in the middle school. And so really looking at how we can kind of get these kids out of tier 3 and move them up and try to support them as best as possible individually. And that's something that we're working on. We're working on looking at the data in PLCs and faculty meetings and in department meetings and really keying in on what we need to do and how we're going to do it. And again, it's going to be something that we continue to work on and continue to look at. We're not satisfied with where we are. There are some points that we say, oh, that's a good thing, and then we look at some other points and say, okay, we didn't really move, and how are we going to move those points forward? You're welcome. Yeah.
Everyone, thank you. Our data is going to look very different, obviously, than everyone else's. And we thought it was important to make sure that for the community to know that our data is still based upon the legacy test as well. So really what the other principals were speaking about is this kind of sense of uncertainty of what's coming. That's where the high school is at this time, because we're slowly approaching that 2019 mark as well. So there's kind of that kind of beginning for us as well, that transition as well. We do have an accountability rating, and ours, we maintained a level 2, which we're happy with, however, that we're getting restless as well. So I will tell you, it's been an interesting couple of weeks at the high school, because we were reflecting on as we were preparing for a new high school, and that we were putting out some data to show growth over time. And that when you looked at us going from a level 3 school to level 2 school, some of the things that what made us a level 3 school, we didn't have any written curriculum to main one of the big ticket items of that. Well, now you have it. So now it becomes that restless feeling again of like, all right, you have it now, so now what are you doing with that? So the conversations have really kind of taken really a turn that's been really kind of powerful for us as well. Our first one is biology. And really, as we are looking at our scores, we have kind of, we're maintaining a 76% advanced proficient rate, 24 needs improvement and warning. That's really not where we want to be as well. We have seen some gains in this area as well in terms of actually what we are doing. And one of the things that we noticed in the 9th grade in particular, which is really a testament of the transition from middle school to high school, is really the students' ability to respond to skill. So when you're looking at our launch of our claim evidence response, our CER model, because the middle school has adopted that, especially in science, you're seeing that transition up to the high school. So there's that strength in their writing, that inquiry approach that you see that's there. One of the things that we're noticing in particular with this here is really just the status of really how we're engaging the skill. You need to remember that for biology, the students, there's nothing prior that they're getting when they come in. So it's a brand new course, it's brand new vocabulary. So it really becomes a very kind of an experience that to have a test and then immediately have a high stakes assessment at the end of it. The prior knowledge based upon that becomes a little bit of a challenge of that. So really some of our next steps, especially in science, is looking at the identification through the common assessments that they have in biology, and looking at the data that we are going through now for biology, is looking at what are the skills that we're missing. Also, how do we move more students to that advanced proficient range as well, and also monitoring the project success. I did think it was prudent to share with the school committee really where we found with the very first cohort of students who took an MCAS test for high stakes, who were enrolled in project success, which is the next slide. We had 31 students in this year's 10th grade who were in 9th grade as last year, of course, who were in the project success cohort. We were pretty happy with what we saw. We had, out of the 31 students, that 45% of them were in proficient and 45% of them were in needs improvement. But only 10%, which actually equates to 3 students, fell into the warning range. What we were excited by is that when we looked back at their totality of their MCAS history, the students who actually were in the needs improvement range that we would have predicted would have failed. So we were happy in that sense, that we saw that first cohort of students coming through the door, that they actually made it over that hurdle. Now, that isn't that we're jumping up and down saying that this is a great success. Now it's looking at this year's 10th graders, who are those students, to see really where they will be as they prepare for their 10th grade exams in math and English. And now it's looking at the data points that we were able to achieve because of that cohort of teachers, looking at actually that data from Project Success, and now focusing on that on the 9th grade as well. So I wanted to make sure the fact that for the school committee, you were able to see just really that very first launch of a very different kind of schedule for those students. We're really happy with that. We were proud of it. But at the same token, it's now being able to look at really how do we get those students down to that proficient range as well.
In regards to biology,
Please.
is that a requirement now for these students coming through to graduate high school and have a signed diploma, well, a state authorized diploma? So those students that were in the failing or the warning, they're going to have to take this again.
They will.
What's the process that they're going through for this?
Sure. So what will happen is for those 3 students that they will be enrolled this quarter, that just started yesterday actually, in a biology review course. And that course will actually guide them. We take their MCAS data, and that becomes the basis of their curriculum in this review course. So the areas that they're really strong in, that's the areas that we enhance. But the areas that we're really weak in, those are the areas that become the true focus. Because the biology MCAS test doesn't have a retest per se, where math and English has a very different looking test than the main test that they will take. So these 3 students will be re-enrolled in that biology review course, and they will take the MCAS test in February of 2018. So they will take them right through second quarter, and then they will test in February.
So those are for the 3 students from the Project Success group.
Right.
Outside of Project Success, how many students were in that? And are they going through that same course?
The same course, it was, I'm, off the top of my head, Mr. Giovanni, I don't
just
have
was
that
wondering.
number, but those same students would also be enrolled as well. There was not a lot of students that failed. If I think those 3, you add on maybe another 2 or 3 or 4 onto that.
Okay.
So that cohort of the warning, 2, Melanie, thank you, Melanie.
Thank you. I just
Thank you,
wondered.
Dr. Gates, I'm sorry.
Okay.
That cohort of 5 students would be the ones into that
Oh,
course.
excellent. I just want to make sure that what they were doing. Thank you.
Yep, absolutely.
Paul, excuse me, to put it in perspective, too. The past couple of years, just on average, how many kids couldn't graduate because they failed the MCAS results?
Well, we've been very fortunate that most of our students have been able to get over that hurdle. However, the test that is the test that has prohibited some of our students from receiving their diploma has been the biology test. We had a student who we really had to work with well after their graduation year to make sure they could pass that test, and they finally did it. So this is one of the tests that becomes an area of focus for us because it is something that is very hard with math and English, and you'll see in a moment when they were talking about the whole concept of literacy and really some growth that Mr. Gagan was seeing in the middle school, wait till you see the English scores, because you're able to see that progression of skill. But when you get into real content-driven exams, it becomes a very, very different mindset. So that's why the data, the digging that needs to be done in that data becomes really profound. For these particular students, the vocabulary is so rich and robust that that's the reason why that it becomes a very, very difficult test for many of our students to get over. So if that kind of helps that. Okay. In English language arts, we were really quite happy with this. This is why it was somewhat of an interesting couple of weeks, because you're celebrating in areas, but you're also scratching your head at the same time. In English language arts, we had 96% of our students in grade 10 score in the advanced proficient range, and only 4% of our students. What that means is that we had absolutely no students in this cohort that failed the English language arts test. So we have some few students who are retesting in this week in MCAS, but they're new students to our school who need to take the test in order to graduate. So if you're hearing the fact, well, they do have students testing and retesting, they're not in this cohort of students that all of them passed the test. So here's what we're looking at. is how do we, now that we know we have hit the benchmark, that we have the majority of our students or all of our students in that advanced proficient range, a couple of items. Now how do we move those students into advanced? But now those very few students that were in the needs improvement range, how do we make sure the fact that we have 0 students in the needs improvement range? But what is interesting is that the skill-based areas of English, you're seeing that growth as they're coming through to be able to say they can create an essay, they can extrapolate out context out of a piece of literature. Here's one area, though, that was a really profound weakness in this year's MCAS test with our kids, was poetry. That they were giving us samples of poetry, and our students had a really difficult time pulling out the meaning. So now, an area that they're beginning to focus on with this particular cohort as well. In our math, this was really the one, I'll be honest, that we're really scratching our head a little bit. Because one of the challenges that we've been finding is that every year, the areas that we grow in and we're celebrating, then the following year, we're really thinking we're doing well, and you'll have that process, and then you fall off the map. And the areas that we really think we're struggling with, you go up. So when you're looking at each group of students, that's something we need to be mindful for us at the high school, that every cohort of student is different. And even though that the curriculum is constantly being refined and it's constantly changing and renewed now that we have it, it is something that we need to go back and say that every group of students that is sitting taking this test is a very different group. In the math scores, that we did see a drop this year. And here's where we found the drop, which I think is important to note, is in the writing of math. This was one of the exams this year that we saw that students were not asked to actually to solve the math problem. In some cases, they were given the math problem and asked to analyze and extrapolate out how they got the answer, which became a very, very different mindset of skill. So our students can take a math problem and answer it. They can show the steps of their work. They can explain the steps of their work. But when they're actually seeing the actual problem all mapped out to the answer, now they're being asked to explain how they got to that answer. So in terms of writing in math, that literacy piece, that's an area that we found to be a real weakness this year, which contributes to where you see that drop. So you notice in one of the target areas, which is a huge target area, is our open response writing in math. We are taking over the teacher data as well, looking at actually those areas. I'll be honest, we had one question that had an open response that we almost had no students answered it. So it's really something that we need to go back and look at to say they can identify the problem, they can solve it, but they can explain how they got it. And that's the area now we need to go back and look at as well. And lastly, just our accountability data. I think it is important because we are coming to the end of this journey as well as the other schools are, as you see. We were very, very happy with our growth and our percentile, and that if you notice that in the 5 years of looking, that we've now reached that 49th percentile, which is really quite exciting for us, and we're very proud of that. You'll also notice that in our PPI, our progress and performance index, the fact that we had hit the golden egg in 2016 with that 75. And you'll notice the fact we did have some sort of a drop. But here's what's interesting. In our all students category, we had a dip. But in our high needs category, we had an uptick. And that has been an area that we have consistently struggled in. So now the fact we've had the uptick, it becomes an area, well, why did we have it? But then more importantly, why did we have our all students kind of have a little bit of a dip as well? So that restlessness is starting again, as we did back in 2012 when we saw the verge of a level 3 school, and really looking at what we're doing. We had a meeting last week of our 3 department heads with Dr. Gates. We poured through the data, came up with some battle planning of really what needs to now be our next steps, which we hope the fact that will take us through. It is important to note that in the 2018 accountability rating, they're already beginning to assess how they're going to look at us differently. So that is an important thing for you to be prepared for, that it's no longer just based on the assessments. It's now based on growth of 9th grade. It's based on dropout. It's all those factors that are there. But now they're adding more pieces to that puzzle as well, which you'll see a year from now.
I just want to say something at the end of this. I think, we go through this every year. Especially for administrators, it is sometimes difficult, sometimes tough. I know right before it comes out, people get nervous and not sure where they're going. You just get what you get. I do want to say that I've appreciated the growth over the years since I've been on this committee. I've appreciated all of you standing up here and explaining to us what works and what doesn't work over and over again. And I think although as we progress and we see what happens in the elementary schools and goes to the middle school, I think where it really ends up is what happens at the high school, because that's the high-stakes test. And when we go through those numbers and we actually see, in most cases, it's 3 or 4 kids. You know, we're talking about percentages, but it amounts to 3 or 4 kids. And then we go back and look at, do those kids eventually graduate? And they do for the most part. I think that's what people should really take from it, that these kids move up and pass when they need to pass. Yes, we need to work in certain areas, and we need to be respectful of that. We need to look at things differently now that we're going to be on a computerized test, and everybody's going to be on a computerized test. But I really appreciate that point, that when it comes time for the high-stakes test that we take, over and over again, our kids pass and our kids graduate. So I want to thank you all for that.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
On top of that, 6 years ago, this data didn't really exist this way. And what you guys are doing with data and your staff and it's not just the 4 of you. I know there's a lot of people involved with that data analysis. You're able to take that data and really look at that piece. I remember one time, I don't know, maybe it was Marty came in, talked about Pythagorean theorem wasn't covered at the end because it was the end of the school year. I don't know if it was, maybe it was math in high school, but we identified we're not getting all that information in. When the data wasn't really able to be analyzed that well, now we're able to look at it, you're using it, you're taking even those little pieces, and then I appreciate when you start talking about the cohorts change year over year. So the teachers are doing if they did the exact same thing, the numbers are going to change every single year because every year there's something different. There's new students coming through, but I appreciate that you're looking at what's coming in at you, so you can say, okay, what do we need? What do we have from the academy? Making sure these students get that little extra, identifying 3 with a couple extras that need a little more piece to get through that biology, so that we can get those biology ones done before 10th grade is over. I look at that and I say, okay, we've come a long way in 6 years since the first time I ever heard anything about MCAS data being presented other than me looking at a table. And we're not just talking about, this is what our score is, we're going to do better. It's depth, and I really do appreciate, and I know there's more that you're not even getting into here. And I do appreciate that you've come out here for this, and it's not easy doing this, but I appreciate it very much.
Paul, going forward, one of the things that I would really like to see, you pointed out how the academy kids are doing. I know there are more kids that you wanted in the academy who chose for some reason not to. I'd also like to see how that played out. Where did they end up, that kind of thing, because I think it would be interesting to see how the kids who actually went through the academy did in comparison, especially because, for some parents it's a sell. And I think if we can show them that the kids who entered the academy did a much better job than the kids who didn't, that we signified wanted to go through, I think that would be helpful to them too.
Mr. Chair, when you speak of the academy, you mean Project Success?
Project Success, excuse me. Any other questions? Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you all very much, and thank you also to Holly Hargraves, Principal at the MEC, Dr. Melanie Gates, our STEM Coordinator, and Carolyn Lyons, who is our PBS Director, who are also here in support of our principals. So many thanks to them. And Frank Catino also. Moving on with my report, thank you very much, folks. Moving on with my report, I wanted to let you know that the Middleborough High School store is open again, very popular the first time it was opened. It's going to be open till November 17th. It is online. You can click on it and go right to the store and purchase some district-wide gear or some specific high school gear. And that will be open till November 17th. I wanted to mention that. It is a partial fundraiser for the athletic department, but it is also an opportunity to buy some nice, perhaps holiday gifts for loved ones and yourself, perhaps. They're really, really nice. The products that came from the first round I think everyone agrees, are comfortable, they're sharp-looking, and they were done very well. High-quality productions, which is great.
This is not just for members of the school community. Anyone in town or outside of
Anyone in
town.
the Middleborough community can go onto the website, go onto the high school store, and buy either the M with the feather, with Middleborough High School on it, with Middleborough Sports, or they can buy the branding of the district, and those are available also, so. And there's Under Armour, and there's Russell, all high quality, and they fit. And they're sized appropriately too, because the shirt I bought fits me very well, so it needs to. Moving on, the open meeting law. You all have a sign off. Massachusetts Chapter 30A, Section 20H requires that you all acknowledge and sign off on revised open meeting law changes that have occurred. You have in front of you the open meeting law guide published by the Office of the Attorney General, Maura Healy. Those are some changes in there, explanations. We'll also send to you in your Dropbox for the next meeting some explanations of why these changes are in each section. And I have these 3 documents that we'll download to you so that you can see through them. Different ways to go about it. One is an explanation of each revision. One is a copy of the old revision with redacted red and changed, and one is a copy of the full new regulations. But it is required, any public board that participates in open meetings, all members, and Mr. Giovannoni pointed out that we're also on the high school building committee, a number of us, and we'll have to sign a similar note. But it is required, and we don't send them anywhere. We keep them on file in our office, but it is something that is required of school committee members.
We have to send it to the clerk, town clerk. He has to go to the town clerk, and she
Yeah.
keeps it on file, so.
Okay.
We can give it to Ann and she can give it.
Right, or to Ann, but if you fill this out, I've already done it with Allison. I sent it out for both. Anything you get sworn in for, you have to do it by the clerk is kind of the rule of thumb. And I did it twice for the school building committee and for this committee, but it's pretty straightforward. That the piece that you're going to be sporting out with the red line is always kind of a good thing, so you can actually see the subtle changes. Yep. Because it's interesting. This open meeting law guide is like the second one in a couple of years, isn't it? Didn't they just redo it a few years ago?
Yeah, actually, yes. She did it
In the spring.
right when she became,
Right.
like a month or 2 afterwards.
Yep.
So yes.
So, nothing substantial.
And right in the book, you can go, that'll bring you to these pages that we're also going to download, but it's the address that's www.mass.gov/AGO, Attorney General's Office, /open meeting. So, and that is in that book, so if you want to get an advanced look at that, you're welcome to.
The 2 areas in which there are changes is one is the timeliness of meeting minutes at both executive and regular session. And then there's another provision in here which hadn't existed before, which allowed if somebody is constantly making open meeting complaints, then a committee after, I believe, 5 can request mediation with said individual. And if individual does not go to mediation, then they no longer have to listen to their complaints, which is really kind of interesting. So those are the 2 big changes that I saw.
Okay. I just want to conclude by saying again, American Red Cross Blood Drive, Middleborough High School, sponsored by the Student Council. It's 8 to 1 on the actual holiday, November 11th itself. I want to mention in concert with that we thank our veterans out there, and in honor of the veterans, our school buildings and offices will be closed tomorrow all day. There will be no school, and I would encourage our students and parents to attend the ceremonies at the town hall on Saturday morning at 10 a.m. The high school band will be in playing, and it's always a very solemn occasion, and it's important that we remember these veterans because they served for us and they make our country a better place. So thank you very much to all the veterans, and God bless our veterans.
When you do attend, please, before you go up the stairs, just take a moment, look at the wall of the World War II veterans who served and some who gave. Thank you.
Anything else, Mr.?
Concludes my report.
If I could ask one question of you, if I may? Sure. If you flip the page over and under new hires, I just have a quick question, and that is, I know we hired a brand-new custodian / groundskeeper.
Yes.
I also know that we spent some money with Park and Rec. I'm wondering if we will stop spending some money with Park and Rec with the new groundskeeper.
We need to begin a transition to a new high school building, and we'll be probably sitting down with the park board, the town manager, to talk about the transition that needs to occur over the next few years. We're a school system that will still be reliant upon park fields and the parks at the public park down at Thomas S. Pierce. So there'll be a transition period that we go through, but that we do have a part-time groundskeeper who can begin some of the work that we need done around our buildings, and but that it would be a half-time groundskeeper sort of in the spring, summer, and possibly the fall. We did have this person in place before. This was a replacement for somebody that took the job and went to a different job. That person did a lot of additional cleaning around the Nichols Middle School. The student cafeteria has an area outside where the students can eat. He prepared that and cleaned that out so the students could, it hadn't been touched in a number of years. So he's been doing special projects right now. But as we transition to a new high school, hopefully opening in the holidays of 2020 into 2021, we'll be in a better position to take care of ourselves.
Thank you.
With regards to that person? That position, not the person, but the person in that position, will they be able to start maybe a renaissance or a rebirth of some of the fields here, really get them in ship shape because they might be needed?
That is certainly our hope, because we begin to rely more upon the Nichols Middle School fields, and we're going to look at getting the irrigation system back and functioning, and taking a look at that. So possibly with some well work, but we'll see on that.
Thank you.
But it will be a process. It will take some time. We will certainly, hopefully, work in partnership with the park department as we move forward through this process of transitioning to a new building.
Next on our agenda is MSBA update, and nothing makes the chair more happy than to tell you only the high school is listed. We mentioned town meeting. I did want to mention to the board that prior to town meeting, we met with the MSA board on October 25th, and that was a unanimous vote by the board to approve our project. I know we mentioned that, and there was the potential for additional revenue for the town in the thing. So we were actually going to get more revenue than we hoped to if everything plays out properly. So that's great.
Yes. The school building committee continues to meet. They'll be meeting the last Wednesday of this month after the holiday, after the Thanksgiving holiday. So it's an open meeting. Usually it's 5 o'clock right at the town hall at the selectmen's room. It's open to anyone. So please come on down if you have any questions, have any concerns, or contact one of us. Mr. Chair, you're on it, I'm on it, Mr. Lynch is on it, or any of the other members, or go to mhsbuildingproject.com.
Does anyone have any questions about that? Just so everyone understands, sort of going forward where we're at. We spend the bulk of, from this point until probably October or November of next year in continued development and building permitting. And so we believe by the end of next year, we could break ground for the new high school. So that's very exciting to us. Any other questions? I'm going to move on. The superintendent and I attended the Mass Association of School Committees and Mass Association of School Superintendents Fall Conference last week. It was a great conference. I had a great time. We spent a lot of time with other school committees and superintendents throughout the area, and attended several workshops that were very interesting. I don't know if you wanted to add anything.
No, it's time well spent when you can get away with the sitting down, and a number of meetings we went together to, which is important. And I know that you went to the annual board meeting of the school committees, and I went to the annual board meeting of the superintendents, and had an opportunity to meet up with other superintendents and other school committee members and get a sense of what's going on out there. And they had questions for us. They talking about the one-on-one initiative that we've begun, and some other things that are going on in our school system that they're hearing about. So I think it was time well spent, as I had mentioned in my communication to the school committee last Friday, that I believe it was. A lot of driving for one superintendent, but that's okay. We didn't stay down there. We chose not to stay down there. We went back and forth. We commuted. So.
Or commuters. Next up on the agenda is the superintendent's salary increase. As everyone knows, we evaluated the superintendent last time. Under the terms of his contract, if the superintendent gets a good evaluation, he's entitled to a 1% to 3% raise. Last year, at roughly about this time, we granted the superintendent a 3% raise. So I'll open it up to committee members as to what they would like to do with the superintendent's raise. Mr. Stevens.
So I did some research, and according to Chairperson Young here, I guess we hired the superintendent at in the low range of comparable schools, and you said there's some data that you had that showed that, and I understand it's because of this being his first in the position of superintendent, but I think he's in his third year performing very well, and I think I did some research on inflation. Inflation's been running around 1.7%. So I think a 2% raise would be a treading water type raise, where I think he deserves a 3%.
I agree.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So thank you for that. I also did some research because I think it's also important to look at, to do a thorough market analysis. What's the current going rate for a superintendent? Because it would be great if we could give like 10% every year, because you're pretty stellar, to be quite honest. So I looked at how many superintendent positions are currently posted. So what's the demand for superintendents? Because I know in the past it's a tough job. There's been high turnover, lots of turnover. So what I found on the MSBA website, where there are a few postings currently. When I looked a couple weeks ago. I also looked at what are some of the salaries in other towns that were comparable with student size, scope of number of buildings, et cetera. So I think that's important to look at. So are we paying you something that, like, more or less than maybe another town with similar type of work is paying their superintendent? Because I think we want to retain you. So I think we want to pay you in that same sweet spot, or pay you a little more to keep you here as opposed to going somewhere else. I think that's important. So in doing that and kind of looking at all of those pieces of data, and I have some things written down if people want to see, and looking at your evaluation this year, where I felt like you had a good evaluation, there's definitely, a couple areas where we felt like there was some improvement that you're working on. I felt like a 2% raise at this time would put you in a good band. I think, to be clear, I think where you're at is 164,290. Is that the current? That's the 2017.
Yes.
Right. So that would put you at 167,575. I think looking at that total number and looking at the band and the range and kind of a market analysis, that would fit really well with kind of the work that you're doing and the scope of your work.
Mr. Stevens.
I believe there's also issues with health insurance. Is that part of the band that you were looking at, that Ms. Franco was looking at?
So I didn't parse that out because that's not included. It tells you when you look at the postings, it tells you if there's benefits included or not included, but it breaks it, it keeps the salary separate. If you look at the MSBA website, it doesn't, so everybody looks the same as far as this is salary and this is where benefits might be added, rolled into that. So
Right, but the
you definitely have to look at the whole picture.
Benefits would be in addition to that salary.
Yeah.
And Mr. Lynch isn't taking that part from us.
Absolutely, yep.
I have one question, Mr. Chair.
Sure.
if I might ask the superintendent,
Sure.
is this the most uncomfortable thing you have to sit through? I talk about a raise in front of TV and
I would talk
everyone.
the evaluation might be more uncomfortable.
It's not comfortable. It has to be that.
I know.
So the chair is open for a motion.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would move that, in accordance with the contract, that we have the ability to go to 3%, that we offer a 3% raise at this time to the superintendent.
I'll second.
I have a motion and a second. Discussion.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
So I appreciate all the work that you do, Mr. Lynch, for sure. I do think you're stellar, and I'd like to keep you here. I think we also, as a board, need to keep in mind as we march forward, and we have to be due diligent with our fiscal responsibility just to make sure we're maintaining an appropriate band if the market is bearing out. So with that in mind, I'd just like the board to keep that in mind as you start to look at other salaries in other communities, just to make sure that we're keeping ourselves in that safe harbor, because I would not like to see us end up in a place where we're outside of that market. So that's, I guess, all I'll say. Keep that in mind as we move forward.
Any other discussion? Hearing none, the motion on the table is to give the superintendent a 3% raise. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Chair also votes aye. It's unanimous. Thank you very much.
I offered.
What?
Does he have to accept it?
It's up to him.
Yes.
I signed the contract.
Next up on our agenda is consent agenda.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
I would move that we approve the consent agenda presented this evening.
Do I hear a second? Discussion.
Mr. Chair, I just have a question. There's minutes in there from a meeting that I wasn't at, so I would abstain from that vote. So how would I?
We could pull those out if you'd like. That's fine. That's what we've done before in the past.
Ask the chair to pull them out.
Okay.
That's all.
Mr. Chair, can
Yep.
you pull out the meeting minutes? I think it was the October 15th.
5th.
Was it 5th? Okay.
Certainly.
Please.
So the consent agenda will include everything as listed but the October 5th meeting. Minutes. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Chair will entertain a motion to approve the meeting minutes for October 5th, 2017.
So moved.
Do I hear a second? Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions?
Abstain.
Thank you. Now, we've taken care of everything on our agenda except the ESP contract. Just so everyone understands, previously we voted to accept the ESP contract and had a vote as such. When we went to have the ESP signed, Mr. Catino pointed out to us there was a problem with a particular piece of language. I met with the school committee tonight in executive session to go over the language. The school committee is fine with the language that we've agreed on, Mr. Catino. So the chair will entertain a motion to allow the chair to sign the ESP contract.
So moved.
Discussion? Just so everyone knows, it is essentially the same provisions as all of our other contracts. It's a 2% raise. It includes pieces in longevity, and this includes a particular piece that if ESP takes over for a classroom for a certain period in time, then they would get a monetary value for doing that. And so, and that's broken down by school as opposed to what we originally thought, which was one for all, but that has changed. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Mr. Stevens?
Are we skipping the subcommittee?
Yeah,
Okay.
we're still working on that, and as I said, and when we run into an issue, I'll assign, but we should have everything worked out. Just so everyone knows, just to pointing out to everybody, because we skipped last week's meeting because we were at MASC and MASS, we will meet next week too. Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Discussion. Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? It's unanimous. Thank you very much.
Thank you.